Now that you understand the different storage options within Azure, it's important to also understand how to get your data and information into Azure. Azure supports both real-time migration of infrastructure, applications, and data using Azure Migrate, as well as asynchronous migration of data using Azure Databox. Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate is a service that helps you migrate from an on-premises environment to the cloud. Azure Migrate functions as a hub to help you manage the assessment and migration of your on-premises data center to Azure. It provides the following: unified migration platform, a single portal to start, run, and track your migration to Azure. Range of tools, a range of tools for assessment and migration. Azure Migrate tools include Azure Migrate, Discovery and Assessment, and Azure Migrate, Server Migration. Azure Migrate also integrates with other Azure services and tools, and with independent software vendor, ISV, offerings. Assessment and migration. In the Azure Migrate Hub, you can assess and migrate your on-premises infrastructure to Azure. Integrated tools. In addition to working with tools from ISVs, the Azure Migrate Hub also includes the following tools to help with migration: Azure Migrate, Discovery and Assessment. Discover and assess on-premises servers running on VMware, Hyper-V, and physical servers in preparation for migration to Azure. Azure Migrate, Server Migration. Migrate VMware VMs, Hyper-V VMs, physical servers, other virtualized servers, and public cloud VMs to Azure. Data Migration Assistant. Data Migration Assistant is a standalone tool to assess SQL servers. It helps pinpoint potential problems blocking migration. It identifies unsupported features, new features that can benefit you after migration, and the right path for database migration. Azure Database Migration Service. Migrate on-premises databases to Azure VMs running SQL Server, Azure SQL Database, or SQL Managed Instances. Azure App Service Migration Assistant. Azure App Service Migration Assistant is a standalone tool to assess on-premises websites for migration to Azure App Service. Use Migration Assistant to migrate .NET and PHP web apps to Azure. Azure Databox. Use Azure Databox products to move large amounts of offline data to Azure. Azure Databox. Azure Databox is a physical migration service that helps transfer large amounts of data in a quick, inexpensive, and reliable way. The secure data transfer is accelerated by shipping you a proprietary Databox storage device that has a maximum usable storage capacity of 80 terabytes. The Databox is transported to and from your data center via a regional carrier. A rugged case protects and secures the Databox from damage during transit. You can order the Databox device via the Azure portal to import or export data from Azure. Once the device is received, you can quickly set it up using the local web UI and connect it to your network. Once you're finished transferring the data, either into or out of Azure, simply return the Databox. If you're transferring data into Azure, the data is automatically uploaded once Microsoft receives the Databox back. The entire process is tracked end-to-end by the Databox service in the Azure portal. Use cases. Databox is ideally suited to transfer data sizes larger than 40 TBs in scenarios with no to limited network connectivity. The data movement can be one-time, periodic, or an initial bulk data transfer followed by periodic transfers. Here are the various scenarios where Databox can be used to import data to Azure. One-time migration, when a large amount of on-premises data is moved to Azure. Moving a media library from offline tapes into Azure to create an online media library. Migrating your VM farm, SQL server, and applications to Azure. Moving historical data to Azure for in-depth analysis and reporting using HD Insight. Initial bulk transfer. When an initial bulk transfer is done using Databox, seed, followed by incremental transfers over the network. Periodic uploads, when large amount of data is generated periodically and needs to be moved to Azure. Here are the various scenarios where Databox can be used to export data from Azure. Disaster recovery, when a copy of the data from Azure is restored to an on-premises network. In a typical disaster recovery scenario, a large amount of Azure data is exported to a data box. Microsoft then ships this data box, and the data is restored on your premises in a short time. Security requirements. When you need to be able to export data out of Azure due to government or security requirements. Migrate back to on-premises or to another cloud service provider. When you want to move all the data back to on-premises or to another cloud service provider, export data via data box to migrate the workloads. Once the data from your import order is uploaded to Azure, the disks on the device are wiped clean in accordance with NIST 800-88R1 standards. For an export order, the disks are erased once the device reaches the Azure data center. Identify Azure file movement options. In addition to large-scale migration using services like Azure Migrate and Azure Data Box, Azure also has tools designed to help you move or interact with individual files or small file groups. Among those tools are AzCopy, Azure Storage Explorer, and Azure File Sync. AzCopy. AzCopy is a command line utility that you can use to copy blobs or files to or from your storage account. With AzCopy, you can upload files, download files, copy files between storage accounts, and even synchronize files. AzCopy can even be configured to work with other cloud providers to help move files back and forth between clouds. Important. Synchronizing blobs or files with AzCopy is one-direction synchronization. When you synchronize, you designated the source and destination, and AzCopy will copy files or blobs in that direction. It doesn't synchronize bidirectionally based on timestamps or other metadata. Azure Storage Explorer. Azure Storage Explorer is a standalone app that provides a graphical interface to manage files and blobs in your Azure Storage account. It works on Windows, macOS, and Linux operating systems, and uses AzCopy on the backend to perform all of the file and blob management tasks. With Storage Explorer, you can upload to Azure, download from Azure, or move between storage accounts. Azure File Sync. Azure File Sync is a tool that lets you centralize your file shares in Azure Files and keep the flexibility, performance, and compatibility of a Windows file server. It's almost like turning your Windows file server into a miniature content delivery network. Once you install Azure File Sync on your local Windows server, it will automatically stay bidirectionally synced with your files in Azure. With Azure File Sync, you can use any protocol that's available on Windows Server to access your data locally, including SMB, NFS, and FTPS. Have as many caches as you need across the world. Replace a failed local server by installing Azure File Sync on a new server in the same data center. Configure cloud tiering so the most frequently accessed files are replicated locally, while infrequently accessed files are kept in the cloud until requested. Summary. In this module, you learned about the Azure Storage Services. You learned about the Azure Storage Account and how they relate to different storage services. You were introduced to storage blobs and redundancy options and ways to migrate and move your data both into and within Azure.